I'm Joshua Lifton. I'm co-founder and president of CrowdSupply. As such, I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about tariffs, not by my own choosing, of course. I don't have much of a background other than that for this, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I wanted to share that with you because in part, I share it with a lot of our creators, right? I talk to a lot of our creators and they are asking, hey, what should we do? And I've cobbled together some advice. So at a high level, you know, I think tariffs are a kind of symptom of deglobalization and also an accelerant of that, right? We've spent the last several decades, probably most of our lives even, building up these intricate supply chains that basically trade, we're leveraging weaker regulatory and labor markets to extract profit. So we built up these complex supply chains, and the cost is the complexity, right? And now we're seeing kind of those being rebuilt or dismantled. But tariffs alone won't really, there's talk about revitalizing manufacturing in the United States. Tariffs are a way to suppress the competition, but it's not by itself going to revitalize manufacturing. Right? Manufacturing, we've lost a lot of talent and know-how and kind of fundamentals. That won't just grow out of the ground by itself. It needs policy at a much higher level. And that's a sort of policy that comes from a federal level. And I don't see that happening right now. So I don't expect manufacturing to be revived in the United States currently. Tariffs aren't new, right? We've had tariffs for a very long time. And the newness is in the double-digit tariffs, or the high tariffs. But even high tariffs aren't new, right? There's this famous chicken tax, which was put in place in the 1960s as the European Union put a tax on American imported chicken. We retaliated with a tax on imported pickup trucks, light-duty pickup trucks. Eventually, the tax against chicken went away, but the pickup truck tax stuck. As a result, America has a lot of pickup trucks, right? And it's a homegrown industry, and it's so profitable for car producers to make pickup trucks that's the dominant. The Ford F-150 is the most popular vehicle in the United States. That's the reason, essentially. You go other places, you don't see as many pickup trucks. So these have long-lasting, societal impacts. These tariffs, right? Okay. Just some jargon. Duty versus tariff, I don't really know what the difference is. I tried looking it up, and every time I look it up, it's something about indirect versus direct. It all seems the same to me. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but for our purposes, I'm going to use them roughly interchangeably. Let me go full screen here. Hang on a second. Oh, this is a Mac. I don't know how to use that. Oh dear. Okay. Green, right? Okay. Does that work? Oh, yeah, great. Okay. So, what can you do to, practically speaking, to protect yourself against tariffs or to just kind of mitigate them, right? One is you can manufacture elsewhere, and some people are doing that. That's pretty costly, right, to retool everything. And also, it's not really guaranteed. As we've seen recently, like tariffs kind of come and go, and you might have relocated a factory to a place that gets hit with new tariffs. So that is not great. And frankly, a lot of manufacturers are kind of one step ahead of the game, right? A lot of companies have manufacturing facilities in multiple countries already, specifically for this reason, right? So you could still work with your manufacturer potentially and avoid tariffs to some extent. Second thing is don't buy and sell as much stuff. Some people choose this, and there are businesses that have just gone out of business because their entire margin was taken and they just can't, what they built is not sustainable in the tariff environment. You could wait until things are less expensive, and a lot of people are doing this, including us, right? I see notices go out occasionally saying just, hey, I know you have the stuff, don't ship it yet, right? Let's wait another 2 weeks and see what happens, right? And there's the kind of fortunate or unfortunate cases where it's already in transit, and sometimes it makes it, sometimes it doesn't. But I know of a bunch of stuff. I'm not going to name names, but crowd supply stuff that is waiting in certain countries, waiting to ship, because we're just going to see what happens. You could increase the price, right? And this is kind of what the big kerfuffle with Walmart was recently, right? Walmart's CEO was like, "We're going to increase the price," and the government was like, "No, you shouldn't do that without lowering tariffs." But there is a price, and we'll talk about more about that later, right? Anytime you add friction to a supply chain, especially these complex supply chains, there is going to be an increase in price somewhere. And finally, you only pay what you have to pay. And that's definitely the most interesting thing on this slide, right? Like, how do I only pay what I have to pay? So that's basically what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time. And to understand that, unfortunately, you have to understand Incoterms. And Incoterms stands for International Commercial Terms. They were created, and it's trademarked, actually, by the International Chamber of Commerce, which was formed right after World War I. And the first version of Incoterms came out in 1936. Ever since, about every 10 years or so, they come out with a new version. The most recent version was issued in 2020. That was the 9th version. And it's a set of rules. It's basically a set of rules that you have 11 choices right now of how to split up risk and liability between the seller of something and the buyer of that thing. And the point of the seller has it in their hands, and then the buyer has it in their hands. What happens in between, and where does that liability land? So for example, if you send it by ship and your ship sinks, who pays for those goods, right? Is it just tough luck, the buyer doesn't get their stuff and their money's gone, or does the seller have to reproduce them or pay back? So that's, again, from the seller. It includes export, includes the freight, includes import, and the buyer usually includes insurance terms as well. It's not just an option. Like a lot of Incoterms require insurance. These are the 11 Incoterms. They're all abbreviations. DDP stands for delivered, duty paid. We're going to go through the bold ones there. That top row of 7 are for any sort of transport. The bottom row of 4 are just for uncontainerized waterway transport. So most stuff going long distances used to go by water. That's not necessarily true anymore. So some of it's legacy. You might have heard of FOB as an Incoterm. People say it stands for freight on board. It actually means free on board, and it's only for ships. Most people, when they say FOB, unless they're specifically doing uncontainerized freight on a ship that goes on water, they probably mean FCA. We'll talk about some of those in a second. Okay, so DDP Incoterms, delivered duties paid. You don't just say, I have DDP Incoterms, you say, I have DDP Incoterms at a place, right? And that place is a place of delivery. So DDP, Mansfield, Texas, United States of America, means that you are delivering probably to Mouser Electronics warehouse, right? And it's up to you, no matter where you are in the world, to get that stuff there, right? And free of any import taxes or tariffs, or you're paying for freight, you're paying for insurance, it's on you, right? That's the most risk is on the seller. Ex Works, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. It's completely up to the buyer to get the stuff from the factory to wherever they're taking it to, right? And that includes export, it includes import, it includes freight, includes insurance, all of that. So, for example, if I was buying something from Shenzhen, China, and it was Ex Works Shenzhen, I would say my Incoterms are EXW Shenzhen, China. I have to hire somebody or go there myself to pick up everything and bring it back. Free carrier, which is abbreviated FCA, is similar, except that the seller is responsible for the export from the country. They have to clear export. And in a lot of cases, that's pretty straightforward. Sometimes there are duties. Sometimes there's a business license involved. I'd say FCA is more common than Ex Works in practice for us anyway. Okay, with those are the 3 Incoterms that we tend to work in as crowd supply. I'll reiterate in case you didn't hear me say it earlier, crowd supply is a division of Mouser Electronics, so I talk to Mouser's warehouse very regularly, and their import team and all of that. Super interesting, very complicated setup. It keeps me on my toes. And they do an amazing job. They work with UPS and other carriers to deliver worldwide. Okay, so with a general understanding of Incoterms and the 3 Incoterms that we play with usually, you have to think about declared value, right? So declared value is what you're actually taxed on, what the tariff. So when somebody says you have a tariff of 25%, 25% of what? Well, it's of the declared value. What is the declared value? Well, it depends on who's declaring it, right? As the seller of something, it costs me, say, $25 to sell it to you for $50, and then you're going to sell it to somebody else for $100, right? So my declared value is $25. Your declared value as the buyer of the thing might be $50. And it's funny how many things are worth $799. And I'm stealing that from somebody, from actually a creator of Crowd Supply. I'm not going to name them, but they were just commenting to me the other day, like, hey, I just received something, DDP, and it says that's worth $799, which is not what I paid for it, right? So when Customs sees something, right, they look at the value. You actually just write the value on there. They're not doing an evaluation of it typically, and they're like, oh, this number is less than the de minimis, no problem, right? And when I say de minimis, I mean the minimum, the value at which, above which tariffs kick in, right? Most people here probably know what de minimis means at this point, if you've been paying attention to the tariff wars going on in the last 6 months. So that is I'd say trick, right, and probably illegal. But it probably happens all the time, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I've seen invoices that are like $100 for something that was 1,000 times more expensive, literally 1,000 times. Okay, which of course has implications for insurance, which of course has implications for Incoterms. So, as a producer of stuff, I have some options on how to ship it to end customers, right? I can ship directly to customers. That would mean setting up an entire logistics framework. If you're shipping only within the United States, that's not too hard. If you're shipping around the world, that gets a lot harder, especially if you want to treat your customers well and collect VAT and remit it properly and take care of the inevitable like returns and losses in worldwide shipping. It gets hairy pretty quickly, which is why people work with distributors. And distributors, you can have a distributor that has one location and they ship everything from there. You have distributors that have multiple locations and they somehow shuffle things between them, and maybe it's invisible to you, maybe it's not, but then they ship from those locations. If they have different locations, that potentially you could reap greater tariff rewards, right? You could kind of skip tariffs if it never goes into the United States or wherever the tariff territory of concern is. By show of hands, and this is definitely a trick question, how many people think that Mouser has one shipping location? A couple. How many people think Mouser has, sorry, I'm going to rephrase this. How many people think Mouser has one warehouse? Okay. How many people think Mouser has 2 warehouses? How many people think Mouser has 3 warehouses? All right. How many people think Mouser has 4 warehouses? Okay. So kind of smattered. Mouser actually has 3 warehouses. They're all located in Texas. So I kind of gave myself away, right? I said shipping location. So for tariff purposes, they have one shipping location. And the reason they have 3 warehouses is interesting. One of them is like a large, bulky thing that doesn't get access very often. It's pretty manual, so it's big, heavy, expensive stuff. One of them is pretty much 99.9999% of everything else. And one of them, which is a few miles away, and one of them that they've been operating out of for a long time. And the other one is almost a carbon copy of that across the street, right? And it is technically a separate building, which means that they've done kind of half the work of setting up a warehouse somewhere other than Texas, right? The logistics of having 2 buildings is actually substantial. Where do you put the inventory? How do you get it? Et cetera, et cetera. So, but functionally, there's one, for tariff purposes, there's one shipping location. That is true of most large distributors. I know that's true of DigiKey as well, and especially of large distributors that have low relative, they serve individuals, right? So I'm not sure about Aero and Avnet. They might have bigger warehouses, but they're also shipping larger quantities typically, right? Okay, so what is Mouser doing for tariffs? How do they mitigate specifically? Well, they're not manufacturing elsewhere. They don't manufacture stuff, right? Maybe some of their suppliers are. I don't really know. They're definitely not like selling less stuff, right? If people are willing to buy it, they're willing to sell it if it's within their catalog, right? But they are doing these other three things. They're waiting until things get less expensive. So as I was saying, I've seen, and actually some people in here probably have seen notices saying, "Hey, hold up for a minute. We're gonna wait to ship this until we tell you to." That definitely happens. There's also they do increase prices sometimes. I'll talk about that in a second. And I'm come back to, again, pay only what you have to, which is the most interesting thing again. So increasing a price at Mouser sometimes appears as actually a separate tariff line, right? Just as a sales tax or a VAT would. You could bake it into the price, or you could actually make it kind of transparent, more transparent to the end customer, saying this is how much you're paying in tariff. Now, for reasons we'll get into, that isn't necessarily the tariff amount. And actually, in Mouser's case, it's almost certainly not the tariff amount, right? The actual tariff amount. It's a portion of the tariff amount. And again, we'll get into that in a second. So they show that on their website for some parts, but they're also wanting their suppliers to invoice them separately for tariffs, right? Imagine if you had to change your price book of 1 million+ parts every week, right? That would be a disaster. I mean, stuff doesn't even get to you in a week, right? So keeping the price book constant or slow changing while tariffs might fluctuate makes a lot of sense just logistically and from an accounting perspective, and frankly from a customer expectation perspective, right? Like customers should know why things are fluctuating to some extent. Like I said, similar to what you'd see on sales tax and VAT. Okay, so now to the interesting part about paying only what you need to pay. There are a few ways to do this. One of them is that Mouser is technically a foreign trade zone, which is a form of bonded warehouse, which means basically they put up a bunch of money to the United States government saying, here's a bunch of money, we promise that, and we're gonna follow these rules, and there's Customs and Border Patrol in there, that stuff coming into our warehouse, we're not gonna pay tariff on, but anything leaving our warehouse going to the United States, we are gonna pay tariff on. Anything leaving our warehouse that came through the FTZ that's going outside the United States, we're not gonna pay any tariff on. And there's tons of regulations around this, tons of security, certifications, recertifications, audits, et cetera, which is why it is so hard to set up a vendor that way, right? And really it's reserved for only the largest vendors, and even the largest vendors, it doesn't make a lot of sense all the time, right? That said, and of course it costs a lot of money to do that. Complexity costs money, which we'll get to in a sec. That said, I think that is being evaluated, and we're trying to examine, can we get smaller vendors in that way? So that's one way. Basically, don't pay tariffs until you have to. The second way is you pay tariffs all up front, and then you recoup them through what's a duty drawback, right? And here's where I'm mixing duty and tariff. A duty drawback is also complicated because you have to kind of look at your receipts, look at your customer list, and you're saying, okay, well, of this 100,000 shipments that went out this week, we had this many go to the United States, this many go outside the United States, and we have to reconcile all of that. Now, that reconciliation in itself is an accounting nightmare, but also you don't even get all the money back. Some tariffs are not drawbackable, and that's also shifting a lot. So, of course, there are companies that do this for you, right? Just like there are companies that handle sales tax for you, there are companies that handle tariff drawback for you. And we have engaged, when I say we, I mean Mouser has engaged such a company, and so this is a way that as long as we are the importer of record, we can kind of track what the tariffs are on a given thing and try to recoup it when it makes sense. And that goes also for the foreign trade zone. We have to be the importer of record, and we kind of take care of all of that, and we have the paperwork to back up and a full audit trail. So, back to Incoterms. You can kind of start seeing that there might not be any best Incoterm, right? It really depends on your situation, and the situation generally consists of your country of origin or COO, your product classification, or HTS code, what the tariff rates are for the particular country you're importing from, what your mix of customers is, like what the split between United States versus not United States, and of course how much margin you have, and possibly how much margin your distributors have. So an example, let's say I'm importing something from Germany, and I'll tell you that I changed some of the details, but the numbers they're not wrong. This is a very common example, I would say, right? Let's say I'm importing something from Germany. The classification is whatever it is, but tariffs apply. The tariff rate is 10%. The mix of customers I expect to ship this to, 60% are in the United States. And that 60% is a real number for crowd supply. And my margin as the creator of this item is, the manufacturer of the item is 50%. So let's take concrete numbers. I want 100 things, each costing retail price of $100, so $10,000 in gross retail. My wholesale price, say to crowd supply, is $70, but my price is only $35. So I'm doubling. I'm spending as much as I'm making. I'm doubling, and getting a margin there. For DDP, the total tariff cost is expected to be $350 there, right, for those 100 pieces. By DDP, I mean I'm responsible as the manufacturer for shipping it to the warehouse and getting it into the hands of crowd supply, say. If, on the other hand, my Incoterms with crowd supply were FCA Germany, then crowd supply would be responsible for all of that, except for the export from Germany, which, let's say, doesn't cost anything. And actually, the total amount that it would cost is slightly higher in this case, $420, right? And that cost, whether it's $350 or $420, is going to appear somewhere, right? Somebody's going to pay that. And it could be me as the manufacturer, and I decide, okay, I have enough margin, I'm going to eat it. I don't want to disrupt my partners and my customers, which has happened. Every example, every edge case I'm saying has happened for crowd supply in one way or another. Maybe crowd supply eats some of it, maybe we split it. Or maybe the customers eat it, and by customers, it could be just the American customers, or it could be everyone distributed. Like I said, all of these things have happened and are happening pretty much everywhere. Oops. So like I said before, complexity is cost in this, right? The more complexity you add, the more things that are going to break, the more expensive it becomes overall, right? So it's not just a matter, tariffs, when you're thinking about an economy as large as the United States, even if you fence it off and try to make it as much as possible only Americans that pay this tariff, it is going to cost other people money too. There's no avoiding that. That said, we try our best to not pass that on, right? So many people in Europe and elsewhere think that Mauser has a distribution center in Europe because it gets into Germany in 2 days, right? Clears customs from Texas, 2 days to Germany, or other places in Europe. Not only that, if something goes wrong, they call a local number, and somebody speaking their language picks up the phone and talks to them and figures it out. That's a sales office and a customer support office, almost in every country in Europe, right? And I've talked with these folks. They get packages that go wrong, and they keep them there, and they send it back to us, right? So they're not a warehouse, but they're a tremendous help, right? And having somebody local on the ground, and maybe even if they're not talking to the customer, but talking to the carrier, is a huge bonus. Okay, so like I said, whether you're doing DDP or FCA Incoterms, there is a cost to it, and even if it's incremental, 1%, 2%, 3% margin, sometimes that's all the margin some industries have, right? The grocery industry, for example, is about 3% margin. Okay, why are there so many of those slides? Okay, so still evolving. I refresh certain pages that talk about tariffs multiple times a day to find out what's happening. I restrict. I have to stop myself kind of. So very quickly changing. there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It depends on your situation and what you're forecasting. And in crowd supply's case, it's even more complicated. It's like, when are you going to deliver the thing, right? If you have an expected delivery date 6 months from when payment is collected, that could be very different than like 6 weeks, right? And so predicting that and mitigating tariff issues is even more complicated there. We do have some levers and knobs though. Like, we can change Incoterms, we can wait, all those mitigations I said. And in some case, this is my we're all in it together sort of optimism. A lowering tide sinks all ships, right? So it's not just a particular industry, it really is everything now. It used to be just a particular industry more, right, up until this year. And now, it's much more widespread, and that has an increased awareness. It has increased awareness across the board. So I think there's more understanding of it at every part of the supply chain, every part of the customer base. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I'm going to take 3 questions. We're running behind. Billy is up next, and I want to give him his full time. Yes.
A few slides back where you showed the difference between 350 and 420, the bottom you multiply by 60% for those that are going to the US. Is it possible to get a drawback in the first case as well, or no?
Yeah, good question. In the DDP case, right, where the seller is on the hook, we can't draw back because we are not the importer of record, right? Yeah. So good question. I should have mentioned that. Or if we could, it would be so hard to do, it wouldn't be worth whatever we got. Yeah. Yes, in the back, Jeff.
If you compare the impact of the tariff situation versus the change in the de minimis threshold, like, where do you put those in terms of impact, and how much of your concern is related to each of those?
The de minimis will probably have a bigger impact on us. And it so heavily skews for certain products that is probably the bigger impact than the actual tariff percentage, right? As you probably know, there are entire industries and businesses that just sell, they only exist because of the de minimis. And if that's gone, there really isn't any margin for them. So I think just from the numbers, it's the de minimis. Yeah, that's my answer for that. Yeah.
Do you have suggestions on how to find out what tariffs actually apply to something? Because I found it's actually shockingly difficult. Like, even the customs website just doesn't even say the right tariffs up to whatever was announced like yesterday.
Yeah, so Incoterms is one of those like smoke and mirrors things that they really want you to think that it's like airtight, right? It's like, oh, I'm DDP, I'm whatever. All of it is leaky, right? I've had conversations. I've actually had this conversation where the supplier put the stuff on the dock, the carrier that we hired to get it got there, and they're like, wait, there's not pallet straps on this. Like, it's just stacked up, right? Where are the pallet straps? Where's the saran wrap wrapping it up so it doesn't fall? It's like, well, that's your problem, right? Like, that level of detail, it happens all the time. Like disagreements about that happen all the time. Similarly, HTS codes, like how you classify a product. If you ever looked at HTS codes, there is not an obvious right answer for any given product, right? And multiple HTS codes could apply, and you could like willy-nilly kind of decide which one. I'm definitely not a trade compliance lawyer, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what HTS code to use, right? And I think that a lot of people are in that position. So yeah, and then once you have the HTS code, how do you find the rate? That is also very complicated because there's now multiple layers of tariffs for different reasons, and it applied at different times, right? And of course there's like when they're rescinded, what happens then? Okay, we'd love to talk to you all about this more, but that's it for now. Thank you very much.